There we are. Happy Black History, Happy Black History Month, right? So 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt like we needed a Negro History Week because Black Americans were being erased Black Americans were being erased out of American history. That's how Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt, and that was true. 100 years later, exactly 100 years later, we have Black Americans, right, sharing the same lineage that goes to U.S. chattel slavery under a few different ethnic names, ethnonyms, ADOS, FBA, descendants of freedmen, feel the exact same way 100 years later that we're being pushed out of American history and being replaced by opportunists, no longer racist, opportunists. Okay, so but in 1926, and we'll get to 2026 in a second. Okay, so Black Americans, Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt like we were being erased from American national history, uh, i.e., slavery in America, Reconstruction, Civil War contributions, inventions, politics, military service, arts, and literature in the US, right? It was not framed as a global African history project as those that want to revise it that way today, these revisionists, right? Woodson's words and focus, right? Woodson repeatedly focused on the Negro in American history, contributions to American civilization, the role of Black Americans in building the nation, right? So his goal was integration into American historical memory, nothing else, nothing to do with Africa at all. No disrespect, but this is America, and America is the sole focus. He wanted schools to teach American history accurately, right? Not with selective memory, not with cherry picking. He wanted recognition of Black Americans as co-builders of America, right? So he was tapping in to our foundational argument, our foundational efforts and how we co-built America. So keep in mind, at that time, we're talking about the 1920s, right? African and Afro immigration to the US was minimal. It was not even a thing to talk about. Okay, because Europeans were barely allowed into the country, let alone somebody from Africa or the Caribbean. So Caribbean immigration there was like a little presence there, but really, really small. So it was clear that his focus was primarily and clearly on American Negro history, Black Americans. All right. Because the social problem was US specific. Jim Crow, which was designed to oppress and undermine and sabotage and hold down, systemically oppress, terrorize Black Americans, former enslaved people from US chattel slavery, specifically and only segregation, right? Textbook racism, scientific racism, erasure from civic narrative. Negro History Week was about, or I will say, Negro History Week was a tool to fight American racial caste ideology, right? It was not originally designed as African Continental History Month, Caribbean Diaspora History Month, Global African History, or Global African Descent History Celebration. It was an American corrective movement. Okay, that's 1926. 50 years from that, what happened? 1976. Negro History Week became Black History Month. Black History Month or African History Month? Which one? Black History Month. Okay. And it became Black History Month during the U.S. bicentennial. Okay. So during the 1960s and 70s, what was going on? You had the Black Power movement. You had the Civil Rights movement. And you had sprinkles of Pan-Africanism at that time. So um, let's go further. Hmm. Negro History Week was created to correct, again, American historical erasure, right? And keep in mind, it focused on enslavement in America, Reconstruction, American inventions, American civil rights struggle, right? So that's exactly what Woodson was addressing. American anti-Black racism, American textbook distortions. So there's no doubt that the primary historical focus was Black Americans' 400-year-old contribution to America. That is historically defensible. Okay. So there are two realities at once, right? Reality A, Black Americans built a distinct American culture over 400 years: blues, jazz, hip hop, soul food, civil rights movement, Reconstruction politics, military service, and U.S. wars. All right. Now, reality B, later immigrants, African, Caribbean, also contributed to American Black life but that was in more recent decades. Okay. So Negro History was created to document and defend the specific historical experience of Black Americans under U.S. chattel slavery and segregation. Okay. So if African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants want, if they immigrate to America and they want to celebrate with us about our Black History Month, that's cool. Okay. We just want nobody to forget the historical core is rooted in the 400-year American experience, right? That keeps it historical, not ethnic hostility. What That's what Woodson did, right? And what he did not say was global Black History Month, all people of African descent, regardless of national history. Nope. His writings were American civic focused. Okay. Um, so if somebody know about a Kwame Ture, Shirley Chisholm, you know, and they want to list them in Black American history for contributing, no problem. No problem. It's still it's still Black History Month in America. Focus on Black Americans with a lineage going to U.S. chattel slavery. Okay. We don't want to hear anything about Marcus Garvey. That's disrespect. Okay. That's taken away from the glorious, precious, valuable Black men and women, Black American men, Black American women. Okay. Our contributions that were healthy and beneficial, innovations, inventions. You dig? We don't want to know about a scammer. We don't want to know about a scammer who scammed many Black men and women out of their hard-working money. Okay, they invested in a pump and dump, basically, the BSL, Black Star Line from Marcus Garvey. All right. The problem that presents itself, all right, the erasure that presents itself when we know about a handful of immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean that might have contributed here and there, and we start to make them the center focus. And when I say we, I'm talking about people in America, American citizens. I'm not talking about Black Americans. That's foundational. Native to the United States. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about when there's an agenda to center recent uh, African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants who may have contributed to our fights, our movements, to make them the center, or to put them equal to Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington. We feel like that's a slap in the face. All right. Uh, that sparks the fear of dilution, the fear of historical erasure, the fear of losing specific lineage recognition. All right. Our argument is simple and is logical and is fair and is not xenophobic, is not divisive. Our argument is Black History Month should center the descendants of American slavery because that is the historical foundation it was built upon. All right. So 1926, Negro History Week, created to highlight Black Americans' contributions to U.S. history. You know those patents we talk about? Yeah, that. Designed to correct American racial erasure, right? Focus on the American Negro experience. Okay. Any questions there? So it is a powerful observation of how Carter G. Woodson's 1926 initiative served as the Big Bang quotations for ethnic and cultural recognition in the United States, right? So Woodson's original goal for Negro History Week was to challenge the miseducation of the Negro and ensure the specific lineage of contributions of the foundational Black Americans, the native Blacks of the United States. Okay, those foundational to the building of the country were not erased from the American story. Right, that was Woodson's Carter G. Woodson's main point. Period. Like, there's nothing else to add to that. Carter G. Woodson was essentially the first to practice delineation, by the way. He understood that without a specific time set aside to study the records, the history of the American Negro would be swallowed up by a generic American history that ignored our specific struggle and triumph. So he delineated from white America with Negro History Week. By creating a week for study, he proved, no, by creating a week for study, he provided the intellectual work, the intellectual framework that every other group, ethnic group, eventually followed to protect their own heritage. Okay. So let's talk about Hispanic Heritage Month. It delineates based on Spanish speaking origins and independence dates. What about Asian Pacific American, right? That delineates based on immigration history and specific geographical ties. Jewish American delineates based on religious and ethnic heritage. Native American delineates based on pre colonial indigenous status. Okay. So the CERN, many lineage-based Black Americans have today is that Black History Month, which was once specifically about us, the American Negro, those that are foundational to this country and Black, native to the United States. The fear is that Black history is being diluted into a global separation of all people of African descent. This narrative, this agenda. All right. Let's talk about Caribbean Heritage Month. That's in June. It exists for a specific immigrant group. How about African Heritage Month? That's often celebrated separately in many cities. Therefore, proponents of delineation argue that February should return to its roots, focusing on the specific history, legal redress, and lineage of the people Carter G. Woodson was originally fighting for. Right? So when Woodson picked the second week of February, he did it to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Did you know that? He wasn't just celebrating diversity, he was celebrating the legal and physical emancipation of a specific group of people. The fact that we now have 14 plus other heritage months is a testament to the success of his motto. Did you know that? People followed afterwards, took the blueprint, took the model, and said, let's try that for ourselves. But it also highlights why the American Negro at that time, called at that time Black Americans, foundational, uh, it was to highlight our lineage, and it must stay focused on its own specific data and history to avoid being lost in the multicultural shuffle. So the shift from Negro History Week to Black History Month was officially federally recognized in 1976 by President Gerald Ford. Examining the actual language of that proclamation reveals a crucial pivot in terminology, though perhaps not the scope shift one might accept or one might expect. All right. You ready? Let's see. So when President Gerald Ford issued his message on the observance of Black History Month on February 10th, 1976, the United States was celebrating its bicentennial 200th birthday. The timing was critical, family. Nothing is done by, happenstance. So, looking at the primary document, two things are immediately clear regarding the language. Number one, the death of the term Negro. By 1976, the cultural ties of the Black Power movement had firmly rejected the term Negro, which was Carter G. Woodson's preferred specific identifier in 1926. It wasn't African, by the way, it was Negro. And 1976, the favor was Black, not African. So 1976, President Gerald Ford issued his message of the observance of Black History Month, death of the term Negro in favor of Black, BLACK. That's in America. That's 1976. That's only in America. Like Don King be saying. It's funny how our OGs, that language pop back up. Only in America, where such a language like Black was being toted around to identify a specific ethnic group that had their specific ethnogenesis in America. Right? Okay. So, to be fair, President Ford's message reflects this shift entirely. The word Negro does not appear in the text. Instead, he uses the term Black Americans. Hello? African Americans or Black Americans? Black Americans. So now watch this. Crucially, for those concerned with the crucially for those concerned with delineation, the 1976 proclamation did not broaden the scope to a global Pan-African celebration. It remained tightly focused on the specific lineage that Woodson championed. So 1976 Black history did not expand past Woodson's desires. It stayed right there. Matter of fact, the text explicitly focused on contributions to the United States. In the bicentennial year of our independence, we can review with admiration the impressive contributions of Black Americans to our national life and culture, right? It called on the nation to honor the accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our Black history in America. Okay. So the 1976 pivot was a rebranding of the specific ethnic group whose ethnogenesis was in America, who has direct ties to U.S. chattel slavery. Okay? Not an expansion on the map, not an expansion of the map. What changed? What changed? The identifier shifted from Woodson's specific American Negro to the slightly broader, culturally relevant Black American. What stayed the same? The focus remained exclusively on the people within the borders of the United States and their role in building the nation. Okay. The dilution, if you will, that many lineage based advocates we speak of, where February becomes a catch all for global Africanness rather than a focus on the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, is a more recent phenomenon, not something that was baked into the original 1976 expansion. That's irrefutable. The 1976 presidential message that established Black History Month is a significant turning point in terminology, but the text remains deeply rooted in the domestic American experience. In contrast to the original 1926 Negro History Week, the 1976 document reflects a shift from Negro to Black Americans. That's it. While keeping the focus on those foundational to the United States. So y'all see where this is going. If y'all thought this was going to be a regular live, you see I'm in my bag today. All right. I'm giving you information you ain't never heard before. You never heard this nobody else channel. If you did so far, just wait. Yeah, so with my efforts, bringing something like this to you, like the video, please. You can share it. Um, you can click the notification bell and the cash app at the bottom, unbiased Ron, because this is about to get heavy. You about to see some real research here. This is very valuable. So the language of the 1926 Negro History Week, we dealt with it, right? We dealt with it. We see nothing change 50 years later, 1976. Give me a second. Yeah, so nothing changed 50 years later with President Gerald Ford and his message on the observance of Black History Month, February 10th, 1976. Everything stayed the same. Okay. You ready? When Dr. Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week in 1926, he used the language of his era. His focus was on the Negro as a distinct race, ethnic group with a unique American experience. Terms used: Woodson consistently used the Negro and American Negro and Negro life and history. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind because a Dr. Ruxpin did a video on this and tried to revise history. He tried to say when Negro was being tossed around, it was ambiguous, like African American. It was all inclusive, like African American. Dr. Ruxpin, you listening? This is how you do real research, my guy. You guys be ending your careers on YouTube. I don't know why. It's a bad look for you. Woodson consistently used the Negro and American Negro. He put American there. So write that down, Dr. Ruxpin. And Negro life and history, right? So again, Woodson's primary goal was to correct the miseducation of the American Negro, while his broader scholarship acknowledged, listen, this is what they confuse and conflate, family. And Dr. Ruxpin did this. And some of these guys do this on purpose to miseducate. Listen, just to prove we're not xenophobic, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, also talked about Africa in some of his works. That had nothing to do with Negro History Week, by the way. And they try to conflate that to their vulnerable, brainwashed audience, which is very tiny, by the way. Again, while his broader scholarship acknowledged the African origins of, people, African ancestry, those who are Black American, foundational Black Americans, native to the United States, those who got African ancestry, they don't deny that. So Woodson would speak to that. Okay, but the week, Negro Week itself, was a call to recognize the specific intellectual, physical, and spiritual contributions made by Black Americans to the building of the American nation. So, family, they try to conflate that. They try to conflate Dr. Carter G. Woodson acknowledging African ancestry in some foundational Black Americans. They try to conflate that. Oh, see, he was all inclusive to a whole continent of 1.5 billion. No, that's a lie. 1976, President Gerald Ford issued the first official presidential message for Black History Month. Despite the cultural shift of the 1970s, right, some went to a few handful of nuggets went to Pan-Africanism and Afro-centrism, which we call Afro-centrism. The language of the document stayed domestic and American-centric. So even though Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism was starting to become popular amongst foundational Black Americans, the language of the document stayed domestic and American-centric. In other words, President Gerald Ford didn't fall for the finesse. He didn't fall for the finesse, okay, that they were trying to do at that time. Ford replaced Negro with Black Americans and Black citizens. Black citizens. He referenced the association of the study of Afro-American life and history, noting the organization's name change, but the descriptive text focused on the American identity. So even though it said Afro-American, he was focused on the American identity, Afro-American. The 1976 message does not contain a global, African, or diasporic focus. It does not mention Africa, the diaspora, or global movements. The message was issued during the U.S. bicentennial. Okay. Ford framed the month as a way to review the admiration, the impressive contributions of foundational Black Americans to America's national life and culture, and to honor accomplishments throughout America's history. Okay, he explicitly linked the accomplishments of Black Americans, foundational Black Americans, to the ideals of the founding fathers, actually, and the American Revolution, positioning the group as an integral part of the American lineage. Hmm. Okay. So in 50 years, what was the difference? Um, the primary identifier in 1926, the Negro, American Negro. In 1976, Black Americans, Black citizens. You see that? Black citizens. So we were just known as just Black citizens. So we didn't need Black and something else, or, a suffix or prefix. If you just said the Black people, the Black citizens, it was clear who was being referenced. We are the original Black people. We are the Black people, and we're documented as the Black people as our primary identifier. No substitute, no shortcut, no nickname, no placement holder. That is just who we are. Okay. We don't take it off and put it on and become something else when we leave and go to another country. Nope. Still Black, and the only Blacks. So the primary identifier, according to Carter G. Woodson, was the Negro and the American Negro, and the primary identifier, according to President Ford, was Black Americans, Black citizens. The national scope of Carter G. Woodson was to focus on Negro life and history in the U.S. The national scope for President Ford was focused on national life and culture by centennial context. Okay, global scope, Carter G. Woodson, minimal in the week's founding, primarily domestic. Global scope was minimum. He barely talked about that. The primarily scope was domestic American, as Carter G. Woodson. Um, President Ford, that was absent altogether from the 1976 text. No global or African themes at all. Zero. He didn't acknowledge that at all. Ignored the babbling from those Afrocentric groups and those Pan-African groups. Carter G. Woodson's ideal framework, successful despite miseducation and exclusion. What about Ford? Fulfillment of the ideals of the founding fathers. Okay. So the 1976 document confirms that the official transition from a week to a month was not a move toward a globalized African focus. Instead, it was a rebranding, just like Foundation Black American is a rebranding to Black citizens or Black people or the Blacks. All right. So, the 1976 document confirms that the official transition from a week to a month was not a move toward a globalized African focus. Instead, it was a rebranding of the American Negro's contribution to the United States. So when people say, hey, man, Foundation Black Americans, hey, my grandmother in color, so yeah, it's a rebranding, my guy, my sister. The shift toward including the broader African diaspora or international heritage, which led to the separate months for Caribbean or African heritage as seen today, was a later development in education and culture rather than a part of the 1976 founding language. In Ford's 1976 framing, Black History Month was established as a tribute to the people who helped forge America's common nation. Okay. Public law. Uh-oh. Public Law 99, that all the way through 244, signed by President Ronald Reagan on February 11th, 1986. Look it up. Was a significant legislative milestone, while President Ford's 1976 message was a proclamation, a statement of support. The 1986 law was act of Congress, giving the month permanent legal standing. Hmm? 10 years later. Upon examining the text of Public Law 29-244, the scope of the month remains remarkably consistent with the original intent, focusing on the American experience. So from 1926 to 1986, the focus never shifted. Don't worry, I'm going to cook these liars in a second. The law is brief and functional, but its word choice is very specific regarding who is being honored. The law uses the term Black American exclusively. It does not use the term African, Afro-American, or diaspora. The law states the month is designed to recognize the essential role of Black Americans in the history and development of the United States. It explicitly directs the president to issue a proclamation calling on the people of the United States to observe the month with ceremonies and activities that reflect. Oh shit, my fault. They always call me. I get a phone call while I'm live. Hold on, family. Hold on. Got that phone while I was live. It's heat, man. Go get some water. Okay, hold on, family. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, get some water. Let's take a little moment to let me get some water. Where's my awa? Matter of fact, yeah, get some water. Take a moment out to like the video. As you can see, we about to hit some uh some deep information. So take a moment to like the video, share, subscribe. The Cash App $ unbiased Ron. You dig? This information is, yeah, as you seeing, is priceless. Dropped information you're not gonna hear on nobody's channel until I drop it first. Ah, I just killed that water. Okay, let's get back. Let's get back. Let's get back. Where were we? Let me share my screen so we can look at that beautiful image. Come on. There we go. Okay, and we got other images. They will change when the information changes. You best believe that. I matched the information with the energy. You dig? So let me repeat that. Upon examining the text of Public Law 99-244, the scope of the month remains remarkably consistent with the original intent of focusing on the American experience. The law is brief and functional, but its words or its word choice is very specific regarding who is being honored. As I was saying, the law uses the term Black Americans, BLACK. That's in our law. That's our primary identifier. That is our ethnonym. That's the name of our ethnonym. Okay, 1986. That's the name of our ethnonym. So there's nothing new about foundational Black Americans. There's nothing new about the words foundational Black American. That's actually old. We just put the foundational in front, but the Black American stayed the same. That's old. There's nothing new about those choice of words. So again, the law uses the term Black Americans exclusively. It does not use the term African, Afro-American, diaspora, African descent, POD, people of African descent, African American, none of that. That's not in the law. The law states the month is designated to recognize the essential role of Black Americans in the history and development of the United States. National focus, what was the national focus? It explicitly directs the president to issue a proclamation calling on the people of the United States to observe the month with appropriate ceremonies and activities that reflect the group's national contributions. The 1986 law reinforces the delineation of the group. Hello? The law was pro delineation. They didn't say, man, the hell with that. We all Americans. Nah, American history is American history. Don't worry about that. President Ford, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and former President Ford and former President Ronald Reagan were all pro delineation in favor of Black Americans. There is no language in the legal definition that expands the month to include the history of nations in Africa, the history of the Caribbean, the global Pan-African movement. Instead, the law frames the month as a tool for African national unity, stating that the observance of Black History Month should be used to encourage all Americans to learn more about the heritage of Black Americans and to strengthen the ties of friendship which bind all Americans together. Okay? Encourage all Americans to learn more about Black Americans, not to learn about those who helped contribute. It was about Black Americans. So if you wanted to contribute to Black Americans, then don't try to get in front of Black Americans to be seen, or don't try to center yourself. Get back into the dark shadows and let Black Americans be the center focus, which we were intended to be. So let's make it clear. So legal status, 1976, President Proclamation. It was suggestion, right? It was suggestive, right? But it went from there. 10 years later, it was an act of Congress, formal law. What was the key term in 1976? Black Americans. What was the key term in 1986? Black Americans. What was the focus area in 1976? National Life and Culture Bicentennial. What was the focus area in 1986? Just 10 years later. History and Development of the United States. What was the global African context in 1976? Zero, none, nada. What was the global African context in 1986? Zero, zilch, none, nada. The legal records show that Black History Month was established and codified into law as a celebration of the foundational Black American lineage. Okay, the expansion into a global Black or Pan-African Black, I'm sorry, there's no such thing as that. The expansion into a global African or Pan-African celebration, or even an Afro-Caribbean celebration in many modern schools and workplaces, is a cultural shift that happened after the law was passed, likely influenced by the rise of academic Afrocentricity in the late 1980s and 1990s. So people were plotting, finessing, squatting, okay, adverse possession. People were squatting on our name. You dig? You know what squatters do, right? They try to take over your home because you were not there for a little while. Adverse possession, yeah. They try to take over what didn't belong to them, what was not rightfully theirs, and claim ownership. But legally, the American Negro roots of the month remain the only definition recognized by the 1986 Act of Congress. So when they be talking their talk, you let them know the country only focused on Black Americans when it came to Negro Week and Black History Month. Okay, so now here is the bait and switch. Here is the finesse. You ready for this? So let's switch these images. Boom, boom. Okay. So here comes the bait and switch. There we go. Y'all ain't ready. Who you think name is gonna pop up when it comes to the bait and switch? What's the first man in your mind? What's the first name in your mind? The transition from Black American to African American in official government records wasn't an overnight change, but a calculated cultural shift that took place between 1989 and 1996. While the 1986 law, Public Law 29244, used Black Americans, the 90s saw the executive branch pivot toward African American. Are y'all listening? So up until 1986, Africa had nothing to do with Black History or Negro Week. Zero. And it followed a high profile push by civil rights leaders, right? The catalyst, who is it? Okay. The shift started outside of the White House in December 1988. Jesse Jackson led a summit of Black leaders in quotations, where they formally urged the public to stop using the term Black and adopt African American. I'll repeat that. In December of 1988, Jesse Jackson led a summit of Black leaders where they formally urged the public to stop using the term Black and adopt African American out of nowhere. Jesse Jackson argued that Black described a color, but African American described a heritage and a cultural bridge to the continent. Family, what have I said all day today where you were led to believe that Black described the color? Nothing. Black Americans were describing a people that have a lineage going back to U.S. chattel slavery. Everything I said today, when I said Black, Black citizen, Black people, Black America, Black Americans, Black America, that pointed back to a people with a unique ethnogenesis in America. Nothing that I say about Black or Black American directed you to a color. Okay, this dude is a liar, and everybody who rolls with the change. This set the stage for the federal government to adopt the term as the culturally correct identifier in the 90s. Hold on. President Bush, President George H.W. Bush, initially stuck to the language of the 1986 law. So even President George H.W. Bush did not want to get off Black or Black American. But you can see the new term beginning to leak into the proclamations. What do I mean? 1990 proclamation 6100 titled National Black History Month. The text uses Black Americans exclusively. Okay, 1990. We're still holding on to Black American. 1992 proclamation 6401 titled National Black History Month. However, in the body of the text, Bush begins to use African Americans alongside Black Americans, signaling the beginning of the transition. So these folks laugh. Tucker Carlson says Foundation Black Americans and culture. Donald Trump calls this foundational. They laugh. Oh, look, you got Bush, who's pushing African Americans. Okay. The full pivot occurred under Bill Clinton. He was the first president to move African American from the body of the text to the official title of the proclamation. This is y'all leader. The leader of everybody who says they are African American. Their leader is former President Bill Clinton. He's the first president to move African American from the body of the text to the official title of the proclamation. 1993 was the first year. Clinton's first proclamation, 6527, was still titled National Black History Month, but the very first sentence of the text began, "The history of African Americans is a story of resilience." Okay? Now, 1996 was the final pivot. This is the year the rebranding was completed. Proclamation 6863 was officially titled National African American History Month. 1996. So 1986, President Reagan, official proclamation, National Black History Month, Black Americans was the body text language. 1990, former President George Bush, National Black History Month, body language, Black Americans. And then here comes Bill Clinton. 93, he still recognized National Black History Month, but the body text language was African Americans. And then 1996, he decided to call it National African American History Month. And then the body text language was still African Americans. Okay. So for us, Foundation Black Americans, who are focused on lineage, this 90s shift is often viewed as the moment the foundational American Negro was merged into a global identity. All right? Black American, as used in the 1986 law, specifically identified the people who were built within America, right? But by switching to a heritage-based term, the month began to open up to everyone in the African diaspora, immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean. Right? So critics of the name change argue that it tethered, air quotations, the American lineage to a continent many had no direct memory of, no direct interest of, while simultaneously making it harder to argue for specific reparations for the unique 400-year struggle within the United States. Are y'all with me? So the shift in the U.S. Census Bureau's terminology between 1990 and 2000 was a direct result of the cultural momentum started in the late 80s. This transition marked the federal government's official recognition of African American as a formal ethnic label alongside the older, more color-based descriptors, color-based in quotation. That's not how we use them. Okay. If you never heard this information before, just press a 1 in the chat. In 1990, the Census Bureau was still operating under the 1977 OMB, Office of Management and Budget Standards. The race question was much more limited and focused on traditional identifiers. The checkbox was labeled simply Black or Negro. The instructions define this group as having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa, right? This is the pivot. There was no multi-race option yet. You had to pick one box. If you were a Black American with mixed heritage, you were funneled into a single monolithic Black or Negro category. The same box recent immigrants pick or would choose. Before the 2000 census, right? So now keep in mind, that is 19, well, we're going here now. So we're talking about 1997 now. So this is the year I talk about a lot when I, teach or engage with my family, dialogue with you guys, or when I'm debating and cooking a critic, a troll. Before the 2000 census, the OMB issued a massive update, Statistical Policy Directive number 15. This was the federal green light to change the language used in every government form. See how that works? The directive officially added African American to the race category. The government acknowledged that many citizens preferred a term that recognized their geographic and cultural heritage rather than just their skin color. Again, this is a lie. This is Jesse Jackson agenda. We never looked at black as a color. I mean, how does a bank have a color? We said black banks. How does Wall Street have a color? We said Black Wall Street. We said Black Reconstruction. We called it Black History. How does history have a color? So the whole black being a race or color, I'm sorry, being a color was a lie. We never used it. Black love has a color. Power has a color. Black power. To be proud of something, proudness has a color. So we clearly was not using black as a racial or color identifier, but this was the finesse. Okay. The 2000 census was the first time African American appeared on the form. However, the Bureau didn't delete the old terms. They combined them into a super category. All right, the box was expanded to read Black, African American, or Negro, right? 2000 was the first year Americans could check multiple boxes for race. This was a major shift for the American Negro lineage, as many people with a known mixed race ancestry begin to delineate themselves differently. All right. So, uh, according to the 1990 census, the primary label was Black or Negro. The 2000 census, it was Black, African American, or Negro. All right. There was no multi-race option in 1990 in the 1990 census, but there was one with the 2000 census. In 1990, the ethnic focus purely racial color based. In the 2000s, cultural geographic heritage added. In 1990 census, delineation impact, it was forced as a monolithic black identity. In 2000, allowed for nuanced multi-layer identity. So let's move on. So as you can see, the 2000 census change is literally a double-edged sword. Adding African American was seen as a win for dignity, moving from a label given by others, Negro, to a label chosen by the community. Like, so again, this is their framing. Okay. So that was their framing, how they looked at it. We didn't feel like that. By grouping Black, African American, and Negro into one box, the census continued to mask the data of the people native, the Black people native to the United States who are former descendants of slavery. Because an immigrant, here's a problem with the data and doing all this. an immigrant from Nigeria and a descendant of the 13 colonies, as us, descendant of the 13 colonies. We both check the same Black African American box. It makes it impossible for the government to track the specific economic disparities, the specific economic damage, like the wealth gap, that only affect the foundational group, us. So, and then the Nigerians and the Africans they bring over here, these are people who can really mask our data to show that we ain't as bad as we are from systemic racism and the ill effects of it and the continuing effects of it up to date, because they are choosing um, African descendants or Africans from other countries who make up 1% of their best in education, talent, and skill work. When I say talent, I'm talking about skill work, skill set, and money. So these guys are coming over here like literally like super successful or on their way to super success. So now they're able to click Black African American Negro and make the stats look better, look like we're achieving and overcoming systemic racism, and we're not. These guys were never affected. They're coming over here and they're being allowed to thrive, to mask how bad systemic racism have put us, or how far down, how far beyond systemic racism put us. You dig? So their accomplishments, their achievements, they're allowed to buy homes, bank loans, all the things that we're denied of, they're allowed to do. So it's bringing up the percentage, and it's also not just about the stats, the aesthetics. These guys look like they're one of us, and it looks like, look, Black folks are being allowed into Harvard and elite schools. Oh, look, Black Americans are buying homes and getting bank loans. What's all that lying you guys talking about? You know. Anyway, the notes from the Census Advisory Committees and the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, hearings in the mid to late 90s reveal a fascinating and heated debate. While many leaders pushed for African American, there was a significant faction of Black American scholars and civil rights veterans who were deeply wary of the change. Oh, their arguments against the term African American were not about rejecting Africa as they frame it now. They were about data protection and legal clarity, which we say disaggregation and delineation. So check this out. Several members of the Census Advisory Committee on the African American population, as it was then being renamed, okay, argued that Black was a more precise term for capturing the total population affected by systemic racism in the U.S. So guess what they did? They gate kept Black. They said Black only applies to those people who were affected, the total population affected by systemic racism in the U.S., chattel slavery, so forth and so on. Leaders feared that switching to African American leaders, okay, back in the 1980s, 1990s, leaders feared that switching to African American would allow the government to disaggregate or split the Black population in ways that would weaken civil rights enforcement. Um, so they here's the problem. The Black leaders felt like, hey, Black Americans never ever like really embraced this whole African agenda. Colored, Negro, Afro American, and Black are terms that call themselves. Not until 1989. Now this African American thing is being pushed on them. Okay. So these black leaders feared that black Americans wouldn't check the box that has African on it. And it's something I told you guys way some months back, and I was just going off FBA Glow intuition. You dig? But this is true. This is their thoughts at the time. They felt like, hey, if there's anything with the word African on there, a lot of Black Americans may not check that box. You dig? Now it's going to seem like, because when it comes to like data sets, things like that, collection of data, if there's a lot of people, resources, and things like that goes there, but if the number is kind of low, it might not qualify for certain things. There's a whole bunch of different tricks there. So black leaders were like, nah, don't put that wording on the form because black people won't check it. They might press other, and you kind of just ruin what's going on. Like that was good job. Yeah, so they were afraid of that happening. Okay. Um, that the numbers would be skewed. And they was like really concerned about um they were worried that a lot of black Americans did not feel African. Okay, this is not my word, this is quotations. They did The black leaders felt like if you put that African verbiage on that form, there's so many black Americans who don't feel African, and they might not check the box, leading to an undercount of the black population. Family. All right. Where are we at? So let's look at this. Black is the term used in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, so changing it on the census could create legal loopholes for colorblind policies. They were, well, the country and those involved were concerned about the inclusivity risk. They felt like Afro-Latinos and Afro-Caribbeans might not identify as African American either, a term that was seen specific to U.S. descendants, leading to fragmented data. So there was issues all around. Okay, with the word African American. African American to Black people, we felt like we didn't feel African, so we was like, I ain't checking that box. And then Afro Latinos and Afro Caribbeans were like, we're not checking that box because they understood that to be only for Foundation Black Americans, because Negro and Black carried the weight of the struggle. So some elders felt African American was too academic or sanitized. That's a fact. That's all quotations. So because the advisory committee could not reach a unanimous decision, the Census Bureau decided to stack the terms. This is why the 2000 census box was famously messy: Black, African American, or Negro. Okay, so by keeping all three, the Bureau hoped to satisfy the elders who still identified as Negro, the activists who identified as Black, and the sellouts who prefer African American. Who ever heard of a man by the name Dr. Claude Anderson? Well, he was the author of Powernomics and a frequent commentator on Black economic status during the 1990s. And he argued that the primary issue with census data was aggregation. He calls it the artificial monolith, right? Dr. Claude Anderson testified and wrote that grouping all people with African ancestry together created an artificial monolith. He argued that this allowed the government to claim progress in Black wealth by counting, and that Black's in quotations because we know Black is a term exclusive for those who have lineage to U.S. chattel slavery. So, but he argued, so he was in real time arguing against this African American all inclusive term. So he argued that this allowed the government to claim Black progress, exactly what I just said a minute ago, in quotations, Black wealth, by counting the success of more recent immigrants while the wealth of descendants of U.S. slaves continued to decline. So this fake uphill momentum was false. It was masked. Dr. Claude Anderson emphasized that while some Black people, often immigrants, right, he's calling them Black for the sake of conversation, right, but African immigrants, uh, or the highly educated were seeing increases in income. So he emphasized while African immigrants were seeing increases in income because they were hyper selected when they got here. They went through a filtering system. America is a brain gain country. We want the best, the highly skilled, the wealthy, the highly educated. So we extract the VVICs and the Asians, the Chinese, and Nigerians, their best to come over here. So of course they're going to thrive better than people who are less educated, right? Less wealth. Anyway, Dr. Claude Anderson emphasized that those type of Africans that come over here would see increases in income. The wealth gap, right? Assets, land, and inherited capital. That's what they were accumulating, those African immigrants. Okay. All that was going on for them. But the wealth gap, assets and land, and inherited capital for foundational Black Americans remain stagnant for the foundational group. So, in other words, when African immigrants came over here after being highly selected to come to America and work, uh, their assets, land, and inherited capital was going up. But foundational Black Americans, it stayed the same. Dr. Claude Anderson argued that the census should specifically track Native Black Americans, right? That's a quotation. That's what that's the term he used. He argued that the census should specifically track Native Black Americans to show that their share of the nation's wealth had actually dropped since the 1860s. Okay. A major theme in a lot of stuff we say as lineage Black Americans. That's our testimonies, right? That the federal resources were being misdirected due to faulty data. Scholars argue that programs intended to provide reparative economic support, like minority business set-asides, were being hijacked. That's the words then. We say tethered. What's the difference? They pointed out that if the census didn't differentiate between lineage groups, a business owned by a wealthy immigrant from Africa or the Caribbean will be legally identical to a business owned by a descendant of a sharecropper, despite their very different historical relationship to American capital. And now we have the displacement theory. So these leaders argue that without a lineage-specific box, the foundational Black American population was being displaced in both the labor market and in government statistics. Okay. As we know, a lot of us that came to know about Dr. Claude Anderson, we knew him through his Powernomics lecture, right? But there's others that was around. We have Dr. William Darity Jr., right? His early research, although his work on reparations gained massive mainstream traction later during the 1990s, he was as busy as Dr. Claude Anderson. Darity was already publishing research on how race and lineage intersect to create enduring inequality. He argued that the Black category was too broad to capture the intergenerational transmission of disadvantage that only affected descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. Leaders in these meetings often critiqued the term African American because it kind of like leached the group's identity to a foreign continent, which they argue gave the U.S. government a pass on fixing the economic damage done specifically on American soil, because African American is being, you know, extended to Africa. So the testimony of these leaders in the late 1990s serving as a warning: if the census did not delineate the population, the specific economic plight of the American Negro would be hidden by the success stories of others. They argue that the wealth gap is a lineage-based problem that requires lineage-based data to solve, because the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and Census Bureau ultimately chose to stack the terms into one box. The specific data these scholars fought for remained buried in the general Black category for the next 20 years. Analysis of the 2010 census and subsequent economic studies from that era, such as those by the Pew Research Center and the American Community Survey, confirmed exactly what Dr. Claude Anderson and others warned about in the 1990s. Once researchers began to disaggregate, get used to that word, family. You heard that a lot from me. Once researchers began to disaggregate the data, splitting the Black population, or the box, everybody check the box as being Black. But once they started to like show, okay, no, let's go by place of birth. Now, you ain't Black. You come from a country with a name on it. Once we start to do that, disaggregate the data, showing these are Black people from America, lineage slavery, and these are African immigrants or Caribbean immigrants who just check the box Black. Once they were able to separate like that, a massive economic rift became visible. Okay, the data showed that the Black wealth gap was actually two different stories being told. So the data showed. So once you were able to separate foundational Black Americans from African immigrants and Caribbean immigrants, the data showed that the Black wealth gap was actually two different stories being told at the same time. Wow. The 2010 data revealed that foreign-born Black households, immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean, were significantly out-earning native-born Black households, foundational Black Americans. Listen to the data. Foreign-born Black households, median income was approximately $43,800. Native-born Black households, median income was approximately $33,500. The masking effect, right? That's what it's called. So that's a $10,000 difference per year. When you combine these two groups into one Black category, the median income appeared as roughly around $35,000. This higher blended number made it look like the total Black population was doing better than the foundational group actually was. Okay. See, that's called masking. Capping. While income is what you earn, wealth is what you own. One more time. While income is what you earn, wealth is what you own. The 2010 reports showed that while immigrants had higher incomes, the net worth of all Black Americans remained shockingly low compared to white Americans. However, even within that struggle, a lineage-based gap emerged. Foreign-born immigrants Households often arrive with higher levels of educational attainment, often termed brain drain, from their home countries. In 2010, 26% of foreign-born immigrants, adults, had a college degree, compared to only 18% of native-born Black adults. Native-born Black Americans remained anchored by the lack of intergenerational wealth because our ancestors were legally denied the right to build and pass down capital via slavery, Jim Crow, and redlining. We lacked the safety net that allows for rapid economic mobility. Okay, so when you look at those indicators from 2010, it showed you the median income for native-born Black Americans was approximately 33%. Median income for foreign-born immigrants was 44,000%, a little more than 10,000. The college degree for native-born Black Americans were 18%, and college degrees for foreign-borns were higher, 26%. Home ownership for native-born Black Americans were declining and lower in contrast to home ownership for immigrants, foreign-born immigrants. Theirs were higher and rising, two different directions. Poverty rate for native-born Black Americans higher, approximately 28%, and foreign-born immigrants lower at 20%. So systemic racism made that very clear. They are handling these two groups totally separately, keeping one above and one below. The 2000 census analysis provided the smoking gun for modern stats, right? That will appease people like myself who say we're FBA ADOS. Okay, it proved three things, right? The economic success of foreign-born immigrants from Africa, Caribbean was often used by politicians to say Black people are doing better, while the foundational group remained in a state of economic emergency. You see the problem? This is why we must delineate and disaggregate. The data showed that even when native-born Black Americans got degrees, they still lagged in wealth. This proved that the problem wasn't just lack of effort or bad choices, as they would say, culture, but a lack of inherited capital. By showing that economic plight of native-born Black Americans was unique and tied to U.S. history, these reports strengthened the argument that specific lineage-based remedies were needed rather than broad minority programs. The 2000 census report finally put numbers to the gut feeling, okay? Because that was our gut feeling, and when we disaggregated numbers, it showed its ugly head. It was true. Many in the community had, right? It showed that the US government was effectively using the success of African and Afro-Caribbeans to hide the stagnation of Black Americans. This realization shifted the focus of activists from equality, being equal to other immigrants, to equity and redress, fixing the specific damage done to their lineage. So we caught the finesse. Now, this had nothing to do with immigrants. This had everything. The beef was the American government and Foundation Black Americans. That's it. That was the beef. We said, aha, we caught you. When we finally disaggregated the data sets, we see that you were doing exactly what we thought you were doing. So we said, yeah, we on you. So yeah, it's done. It's done. All this equity, all this equality, minority, the people of color, we're done with that. Reparations.